So you've heard of the NEET, you've heard of the Wagecuck, but I have a new term that I want to introduce, an Argent term, and that is the Wage Hermit. So for those of you who aren't aware, just briefly, a NEET is someone stands for not in education, employment, training, or school, if memory serves correctly. It basically refers to people who are unemployed and aren't looking for work or going to school or attempting really to seek gainful employment anytime in the foreseeable future. And it was kind of something that came out of the financial collapse or the financial crisis. I mean, this thing's existed for a while. It's existed in Japan for quite a long time. But in the West, with kind of the drying up of a lot of entry level and even kind of mid level work, and it kind of became more and more just like minimum wage jobs and then really, really expensive, high paying jobs. And kind of the middle and the lower middle fell out. So a lot of people were left, they got out of a university with a degree or something. And traditionally, people who had a degree, they could go start out at a company. The company would train them. They'd work their way up. You've heard that. Get your foot in your door, get some experience, work your way up. They'll train you, etc. But that's not the case anymore. And a lot of people just find, especially if they have a certain skin color, they can't get affirmative action, and they don't have certain body parts, then yeah, it's very difficult to get work. I know from experience, most jobs in Canada have some variation of white males need not apply, some sort of where you're an equal opportunity employer. But I digress. My point is, you have this whole generation of people who became NEETs, and it became a symbol of pride. So it's like NEET life, comfy Pepe is kind of the big one, and some of them kind of in typical post irony, you have the case where people start to internalize their own memes, because it initially started off as kind of a, okay, of course we're kind of losers, but the wagecucks have to do this, and it eventually became like a superiority complex that NEETs are like this ascended Evolacan super being, and people who work for a living are inferior. They're like a lower caste or something like that. And this was like on R9K, and this is just a common meme in the circles. The Death to Normies Party is partially kind of a parody of this. So the wagecuck is basically someone who basically just works themselves to death and is never able to get ahead. Their debts just keep increasing, etc., etc. They're basically a wage slave, whereas the NEET lives in the parents' basement and ironically may have a higher net worth than the person who's kind of trying to be responsible. So I'm going to introduce a new term, something that goes beyond a third position, if you will. It's kind of like the fascist version of this. You have like the right wing NEET and the left wing wagecuck, and then you have like the syncretic work position, which is what I call the wage hermit. So what's a wage hermit? A wage hermit is somebody who lives the lifestyle of a NEET but works full time. Specifically, someone who works more than full time. Basically, it's somebody such as myself who works probably like 50, 60 hours a week, plus, because of the way modern cities are set up, has to commute a couple hours a day. And basically, in my case, I leave at like 7:30 in the morning and get home at like 6:30 if I'm lucky, 7:38. And basically, the people are working so much they don't have time to do anything else. Like on the weekend, you just sleep. You don't like you get home at I don't know like 7 o'clock, and you have to go into work again at 7:30. There's not a lot of time. There might be an hour or two to go out and do something, but most people are just too tired. So you just wind up going home, watching Netflix, eating chips or whatever because you're too tired to cook, playing video games, that kind of thing. And because you really just don't have time to do anything, but you have money because you're working full time, you start to buy yourself stuff. And that's kind of an aspect of the NEET, is it's someone who often might be working a minimum wage job, and since they live in their parents' basement and they have no living expenses, they still have quite a bit of disposable income. Or maybe their parents are wealthy and they give them money. So kind of the wage hermit is like, okay, I have all this money. Maybe it's not a ton, but they have disposable income and they don't really have normal hobbies because they can't. So the wage hermit will spend the money on, video games, figurines, silver, waifus, body pillows. I got a couple of those. Just stuff like that. They'll buy themselves kind of fancy gadgets, high performance computers, that kind of thing, and they'll basically kind of de facto live a neat lifestyle. They won't really go out to socialize. They won't really have many IRL friends. They may not spend time with their family. Basically, all they do when they get home is just play video games, sleep, or watch TV or something, because they're just so drained from daily life. And this is not just kind of me talking about it. I think a lot of people probably have experienced something like this. In a lot of parts of the world, particularly in North America, commutes are getting longer and longer. That's partially because of poor urban planning. That's partially because the all the jobs are in urban areas to a large extent, but wages haven't gone up at the same rate as housing. So people, if they want to not have a mortgage that's 20 times their income, have to live out in the suburbs and commute in. Traffic's just gotten worse. There's just a lot of things that have increased commute times, and people are working longer and longer hours. Unpaid overtime is a huge thing. It's kind of a huge global phenomenon, to the point where people work themselves to death now. And it seems, despite productivity going up, people work longer and longer hours and relative pay keeps going down. So you have a situation where people are literally kind of chained to their desks. Because you have, like I said, wages are kind of flat, housing and food and all that stuff is kind of going up. And to try to kind of make ends meet, they have to live a kind of this strange semi-aesthetic lifestyle where they can't afford big ticket things like maybe traveling or an actual house or a family or personal hygiene or food that's not chicken tendies, but at the same time they'll have money to they'll have disposable income. And it's kind of, there's a difference between having money and being wealthy. Because there are people who have money. There'll be people who have $100,000 or a couple $100,000 saved, but they don't make a ton of money at their job. And if they get fired or something, they can go through that very quickly, even if they are kind of conservative with their money. They might have cash, but they can't finance something like a house or a car or something like that. So you have people who, because they don't have enough money to really become wealthy and start kind of amassing the bigger ticket items, they also have more money than they need to buy kind of basic stuff, so they have a fair amount of disposable income to just kind of spend on things, which is kind of like the whole NEET phenomenon. Kind of another aspect of the whole wage hermit thing is eating chicken tendies and eating food out. Because, once again, you're just too tired when you get home to really cook. Maybe you don't have time to go grocery shopping, and on the weekend you might go grocery shopping. But it's just a very much a case where the vast majority of your waking time is spent either at work, commuting to work, or taking calls and emails outside of work, because that's something that becomes more and more prevalent. It's not only that people are working 50, 60 hours a week, but they also have to be on call 24 hours a day, because people are going to text them, message them, email them, and they get in trouble if they don't answer it. So basically, the people just, when they get home, they just, like I said, they just go veg out. And they don't really have the time or money to pursue kind of what's normally considered to be adult things, like I said, owning a house, a car, having a family. They don't have that money or the time really to do that. But unlike the NEET, they do work for a living. So hopefully I'm kind of making sense here, because you kind of have this strange kind of syncretism of the Wagecuck and the NEET, who have kind of combined to form the Wage Hermit. And someone who can be just as antisocial and just as reclusive and have pretty much the exact same interests, despite the fact that they're employed. They work like 60 hours a week, and the NEET works like 0 hours a week, unless you count earning good boy points as work. So that's kind of an idea I had. Hope you guys were kind of amused by it, maybe made you think a bit, and more videos to come.